Back to Lumberjack Camp. We're on Chapter 9, A Lousy Night. Louse is the plural of lice. Okay. Gus rolled over into the wooden bunk. The hay, which was supposed to make the bunk comfortable, lay flat and scratchy under the heavy blanket. This is supposed to make sleeping easier, Gus wondered to himself. Gus could hear someone walk past the bunks, open the door. "Tarnation, Betty, get yourself in here," called a voice, and the door squeaked shut. Hardly had Gus begun to settle again, and then he heard some of the men snoring. "Oh, no, I can't believe this," he thought, out loud, rolling over again. He pulled the blankets up over his head, tucked it around his chin. There, he thought, maybe I won't hear all the men sawing logs in their sleep. Warm and tired, Gus began to drift off to sleep. Then he felt something like a needle prick him in the face. Sitting up quickly, he rubbed his face. Then he felt another sharp prick. This time it was in his arm, not just once, but twice. The darkness of the bunkhouse, Gus whispered to Tommy. "Tommy, there's something biting me. I can't see what it is." "Be quiet, boy. It's just the bed bugs," was Tommy's reply. "You're sleeping in a cootie cage. What do you expect?" "Bed bugs? Cootie cage?" exclaimed Gus. "Let me out of here." Gus scrambled around the wooden bunk, feeling for his clothes. A voice sounded like moonshine called, "Bed bugs, boys. Get used to them. They're a fact of camp life. If you listen carefully, you can hear them crawlies around you. They kind of make a popping sound." Gus sat up in the corner of the bunk with the blanket pulled over his head. "How can they live like this?" he wondered. Another voice joined the conversation. "Lice, grayback, pants rabbits. They clean to every seam of your clothes. You can't get rid of them, boy. You'll be crummy with them by tomorrow. I've washed them out, picked them out. I've heard the best way to get a couple hours of sleep is to get up, take off your long johns, and reverse them. It takes the pants rabbits about 2 hours to crawl through the other side to get the taste of your skin again." Tommy reached up and gave the bottom of Gus's bunk a kick. "See what you started now?" A third voice chimed in from the other side of the bunkhouse. Gus knew it was Rat Hole Andy. "Hey, boy, maybe this'll work. Tomorrow, when you're in the cook shacks, take some salt and pour it in your long johns. Rub it all over and do it right before you go to bed. In the morning, you go down the stream and strip out of your clothes. I've heard it told that those graybacks jump right out of your clothes in the water, you see. They're so thirsty from chewing on the salty hide, they jump into the water for a drink. And if you move fast enough, you can get your britches back on before they catch you." The men in the bunkhouse laughed and hooted. "That's a good one, Rat Hole Andy," they called. "All right, you hooligan," said Tommy. "We got a long day ahead of us. We better get our rest." Rat Hole Andy called out again, "Hey, boy! If you catch some good ones, I'll race them with mine tomorrow. We'll see on the hot stove." Gus was more tired and miserable than he had ever been in his entire life. His stomach still rumbled from the chew, and now his bed was full of bugs. He was never going to get any sleep. He longed to be home in his waterbed. At 4 a.m, just after Gus had finally fallen asleep, Tommy booted the bottom of Gus's bunk. "You better be up before the Addie comes to get you. Didn't you hear the first bell?" Gus hadn't heard the first bell. Then he wished he hadn't heard Tommy feeling around his miserable bunk. He found his clothes. He put a shirt on. His arm began to itch. And he pulled on his pants. His legs began to itch. He scratched his arms and legs. The more he scratched the bug bites, the more they itched. And he rubbed his legs and his arm. Gus looked around him. Small kerosene lamp through the bunkhouse, casting weird shapes on the floor in the bunks. A few men who had to get up early to go to the outhouse were talking in the dim light. Gus could see a man in long red underwear standing in the corner in the front with some wash buckets. He was dunking his head up and down in the water and rubbing his stubby whiskers. Turning to Gus, he said, "Boy, you better wash up a bit before you see Miss Addie, or she'll throw you out in the tub with dirty dishes and scrub you with the wire brush." Running his hands over his face, Russ could feel the swollen bug bites. Maybe It'd be a good idea to wash, he thought. After the man moved aside, Gus could see Rat Hole Andy. Here, boy, wash here. I'm finished. In the dim light, Gus tried to look into the bucket to see if the water was still clean. It's clean, boy. A hot to boot. I just got off the stove. I only dunked my head in and rinsed my mouth. Ugh, the thought of washing the same water as Andy turned Gus's stomach. But once again, he had no choice. Scooped up a handful of hot water, rubbed it over his face. Ain't you gonna rinse your mouth, boy? Gus shook his head. No, I don't think so. Thanks anyway. Well, don't you go talking to me today if you don't rinse your mouth. Gus snickered at the thought of that dirty old man with half his teeth rotted being worried about washing and rinsing his mouth. Then he shook the water off his face, made his way across the room to the door. Gus was near the door when he heard a loud meow, followed by a great hiss. Betty arched her back and spit wildly at him, all the while flinging her tail back and forth. I must have stepped on her tail, Gus thought. Stepping back into the darkness to see where the cat had gone, he stumbled over the spit bucket, which made him ill the night before. It rolled across the bunkhouse floor, spilling its contents and leaving dirty, wet trail of jumping back out of the mess. Gus knocked over a chair. Quiet, a rough voice called out. Gus stood silently for a second and held his breath. Just then, Betty rubbed against his leg. Gus reached down to make peace with Betty, the three-legged animal. Betty grabbed his hand with her claws, biting as hard on his thumb. Gus jerked back his hand. The cat ran off into the shadows of the bunkhouse. Gus squeezed his thumb and gritted his teeth so not to yell out in pain. That stinking cat. This stinking bunkhouse. This rotten lumber camp. I want to go home, thought Gus. I only knew how I got here, I'd be able to get back home, back to school, or back to even fight with Al. Standing for a second in the dim stillness, Gus got himself together, opened the squeaky bunkhouse door. Outside it was still dark, but from the reflection of the moon, Gus could see snow gently falling. I've got to get back home. I can't live like this, thought Gus as he rubbed his welts on his arms and face. Gus cut across the yard to the cook shack. He could see the light from the lamps already lit. As Gus entered the warm room, Alex was stacking the wood beside the cook stove. Alex looked up, spotted the welts on Gus's face, and broke into a grin. You look like you slept with Lice Brigade, he laughed. Just then, Addie entered the kitchen from the dining hall. She took one look at Gus and knew what kind of night he had. You be minding your mouth, Alex, here. Gus, take the lantern and pail and go milk Ma. She'll be ready for you. Gus picked up the milk pail and left the lantern and left the kitchen. I'm glad not to have to work with Alex for a while. Catching Ma for milk wasn't easy, but Gus finally got her in the manger. We tied her up. Chasing a cow around the barnyard was fun in its own way. Gus decided that much better than working with Alex. Gus was finished milking when the Tommy came in to feed the horses. He leaned over the manger and looked at the boy. You had a poor night, didn't you, boy? I know how they are, 'cause I've had my share of them, too. The longer you camp here, the less the bugs bother you. The skin doesn't bump up like it does much either. Why, most of us, Jacks, we take it as part of camp life, like the snow and the ice and the good cooking of pretty women by the name of Addie. Gus looked up from his milking and smiled at Tommy, whose eyes were bright and twinkling. Just then, Gus felt something rub against his leg, and he knew it was mean three-legged Betty. I heard a ruckus in the bunkhouse when the cat this morning. As soon as you make your peace with that critter, better off you'll be, boy. Gus turned around to see if the cat sitting wobbling like waiting for her milking cream. He squirted milk at her, and she lapped it off her face around her mouth. Both he and Tommy laughed at that crazy cat.